Hello again, everyone. This is the second reading from this magazine, Remembering Comics legend Alex Toth from Alter Ego. Industry Tributes Never Seen Interview, Unseen Art. And I'm going to continue. This is Alex Toth, Part 8 of my video series. So here we go. Alex Toth, Tribute to a Titan, Part 1. I'm going to read a few pages of this. That's all I have time for this morning, and then I'll finish up. And then again, as I reminded everyone, I'm reading about Toth, his mind, his work, everything that he thinks about art, everything that he's basically more or less, most everything that he said about art. I don't know if I have all the interviews here, but I have a lot of them. And then I'm going to show you his art from my many books on him. Because again, is one thing showing and telling. I think Alex Toth is the greatest comic book artist of all time. And my point about this video is try to make the case and also introduce him to people who have never heard of him, which is hard to believe for me, but there are people who've never heard of him. Now, they've heard of people who've been influenced by him and so on, as most everyone has. But here we go. Alex Toth, Edge of Genius. An overview of the first few years in the career of one of comics' greatest talents by Greg Theakston. Greg Theakston is a comics collector, researcher, and historian, and through his company, Pure Imagination, has published numerous books on comics and comic artists, many of them featuring the works of Alex Toth. So it says here, the noble Julius Schwartz was being amused by his favorite pastime, bridge, in the production department with anybody who knew how to play the card game. During working hours, Schwartz was one of a team of editors who had been producing material for the highly successful national periodicals, now better known as DC Comics, for going on a decade. Part of comic book royalty, whose only equals or betters, some would whisper, resided in the kingdom of Dell Publishing, all stern with their subjects and in some cases tyrannical. The company's top-paid artist, Alex Toth. Now, sorry, I just got to mention here, Toth began his career, I think, at 15 years old. He was very, very young, and he was very, very good. And I remember Joe Kubert and others talking about how much better he was than his peers. And he was a few years younger than maybe all of them, than Kubert and others. So here again, the company's top-paid artist at Dell Publishing, Alex Toth, pushed through National's cold double doors, bundled against the winter winds, portfolio, treasure chest in tow, eyes scanning for Schwartz. Locking on his target, Toth beelined for the pickup game and said, "I'm here to pick up my check." Noble Schwartz, this is funny, Noble Schwartz refrained from looking up, contemplated his hand, and answered in an offhand manner, "I'll give it to you after lunch." And then Toth says, "Do you have my next Johnny Thunder script?" Alex parried, "No, your next assignment is a science fiction story." Toth says, "I'm turning in my Rex job, but Johnny Thunder is next." And then Schwartz says, "The science fiction story is your next job." Growing discontentment began to boil at the back of Toth's neck. It wasn't the first time he wanted to rebel. More and more, National seemed a claustrophobic kingdom, with unseen walls pressing in, and an evil foreshadowing of continued compromise. Unwilling to have his fate so randomly decided, Alex Toth, arguably the top dog at the company, quit on the spot. Apocryphal versions of the story have Toth dragging Schwartz to the nearest window and dangling Julie out of it until he promised to immediately produce the check. I have read about that story in numerous publications. It's hilarious. And while Toth's anger is infamous, the story underlines Alex's frustration far more than it does an actual event. It didn't matter either way. Alex had an ace in the hole. Julie played out the game, went back to his office, and quickly divided Toth's estate among his round table of creators. I just want to read this actually here quick. This has to do with Roy Crane, Milton Caniff, Noel Sickles, right here. Those all-time greats. And I'm not sure who this one is. I can't see by the name. But four from the firmament. Caniff's Terry and the Pirates and Roy Crane's Wash Tubs with Captain Easy. Frank Godwin's Connie. Okay, interesting. Frank Godwin. Oh, okay. The reason why it's interesting to me is because Frank Godwin adapted the Fountainhead, Ayn Rand's The Fountainhead, into a comic strip. And from what I gather, King Features wanted to do it. They got a writer to do it, and then something fell through, and Ayn Rand herself ended up writing it. And it was less of a comic strip per se than like a telling of it, a short form telling of the Fountainhead with the text at the bottom of the panels with no dialogue balloons, nothing on the panels. And while I would have loved an artist like Noel Sickles to have done it, Frank Godwin, a good cartoonist, but a little too busy, not as simple, not as stylized as I think the comic deserved. But wow, okay, so this guy puts four of those, Frank Godwin included, which I gotta say, a little surprised, because these guys are all-time greats, and Frank Godwin, again, I cannot help but look at his comic strip and say, oof, I wish he did it this way, I wish he did it that way, I would have done it this way, and so on. And I can go on about that as to the reason why. I'm very particular about that, which I mentioned on the Comicscape, but you'll see soon enough. Anyway, so four from the firmament. Caniff's Terry and the Pirates, and Roy Crane's Wash Tubs with Captain Easy. Frank Godwin's Connie. Noel Sickles' Scorcher Smith. These, says Greg Theakston, seen in photo, were the early icons of young Alexander Toth. Now that's, again, you come across these things. I read all this. I forgot this little detail. I didn't know that Toth held Frank Godwin as high. Now, in one of the books that I have on Toth, he listed Roy Crane, Milton Caniff, Noel Sickles, and others on his list of the greats, right? And Frank Godwin wasn't there. So I would have to see Toth mention Frank Godwin, which I don't think he has. But Greg Theakston must know something that I don't, because he mentions it here. I doubt he would mention it just for the hell of it. Not for no reason other than Toth is on record. But interesting. Again, so were the early icons of Alexander Toth. So here are vintage panels from all four of those newspaper comic strips. Terry, 1935, Wash Tubs, 1937, Connie, 1929 or 30, Scorchy, 1935. A Toth tribute to Terry can be found on page 19. Terry Art, 2006 Chicago Tribune, New York News Syndicate. Our successes. Okay, anyway. Interesting. You learn something new every day, right? And again, I read this. I must have overlooked that. Incredible. Okay. So here we go. It was time for a change. Anyway, change had been the touchstone of Toth's career. The fall and winter of 1952 found Alex. Now, he was 24 years old at this point. He was 24, yes. He entered again when he was a kid. The fall and winter of 1952 found Alex in the middle of the change he'd been working for his entire professional career. Many jazz musicians of the era were working and thinking hard the same way, trying to push their art beyond what had come before. Passionate expression and unique approach in the face of faceless monotony, Toth, who was aware of all modern trends, felt a kinship. The streamlining introduced at the 1939-1940 World's Fair finally began to hit the minimalist wall. The arts were becoming, as industry had become, simplified. Louis Armstrong was old hat. Charlie Parker ruled the day. Milton Caniff had set the standard in the more highfalutin world of comic strips, but as yet no one had appeared in the comic book field as a pretender to the throne. And again, I hope you listeners don't mind my interjecting here, but just these type of things come to mind because, again, Toth's heroes His main heroes were comic strip artists, not comic book artists. His main heroes were comic strip artists. Those are the ones that he held at the top. From Milton Caniff, from Roy Crane to Milton Caniff to Noel Sickles. And here he was doing something that they never did, comic books. And it just tells you it's something, it's interesting. He brings that different look into comics. That, because again, as he says here, the highfalutin world of comic strips, which is interesting to me because that's long gone. That's a distant memory now. Whereas comic books, overtook that in terms of storytelling, in terms of, the ability at least to tell great stories. Many don't, but so it's just interesting to me that he admired these guys above all the comic strip artists, and I think one of the main reasons why is they wrote, penciled, inked all their things, and a lot of comic book artists didn't do that for time or whatever. Most didn't do that. Anyway, so just something interesting to me that those were his heroes, and he didn't follow in their footsteps. He really didn't. He, I think, ghosted on one of those strips at a certain point. Aquila, I think, was one strip that he did, if I'm not mistaken. I remember it, and there's something else, a guy who could fly, I believe. But he brought that, into comics. And also there was a point here where they mentioned 1952. Who was it? Jesse Ham, who was a really good cartoonist, who had this great series of Toth online. He passed away, unfortunately, a number of years ago, but he had this great, retrospective of Toth and the change he made from 1950 to 1952, something along those lines. It was when he had, I think, made contact and gotten the Famous Artist School books, and he just jumped in terms of quality. And check it out if you can. It is still there. Yes. You can actually buy a PDF of it. Jesse Ham, look it up. Jesse Ham, Alex Toth. You can buy a PDF, which I did end up buying. A collection of all those things. It was great. A great breakdown of Toth and how he became as good as he became, and why, and the difference prior and after. Okay. So here we go. Let's see. The comic book throne, but as yet no one had appeared. But as yet no one had appeared in the comic book field as a pretender to the throne. Alex Toth was well on his way to changing that scenario. Humble beginnings. The Depression pressed on during Alex's entire New York City childhood. Relentless brick, cement, and steel days and nights were brightened by the movies and the comic strips. A trip to the Lowe's was a big 10-cent event and didn't come often enough. The strips, on the other hand, lined every city street trash can forward to an intersection. Discarded thrills and laughs within hand's reach of you weren't too proud. Discarded thrills and laughs within hand's reach if you weren't too proud. Every day and in color on Sunday evenings. Found art, literally. Hot styles abounded, and the guy on the end of the brush was a star to the public. They really were, these comic stars, they really were massive stars. Cover of Time magazine, and at the time, when it meant something. The golden age of the newspaper strip complemented the golden age of Hollywood perfectly. One satisfied the need for visual satisfaction with fleeting moments, the other with delightful static permanence. The young Alex Toth's eyes were quenched looking over the frozen images of Kinnick's Terry the Pirates and Roy Crane's Wash Tubs with Captain Easy, Frank Godwin's Connie, Noel Sickles' Scorchy Smith, and 100 others. But it was far more than just a pleasurable read. It was study time. Homework without deadlines or grades. Each panel and its contents were mentally scanned and rescanned, and more of the young boy's brain matter branded with the basics of composition, style, and storytelling. Full cartoon creations with nuance and the subtlety of the best Hollywood production. Not just characters you knew and liked, but characters you got to know and liked better every day. Alex wondered if he could bring comic characters to life too. Again, interesting. His heroes were comic strip artists. He wanted to be a comic book artist. He wanted to bring that high, quote-unquote, highfalutin quality, as mentioned here, to comic books, to lift them, which he always did. However, to suggest that comics and movies were Alex's only youthful passion would be misleading. Like every child of the 30s, the young Toth cut his literary chops on the other teething rings: radio, pulps, big little books, the classics. All contributed to the boy's heroic spirit, sense of adventure, and wonder. Like most kids his age, Alex was an Errol Flynn fan. It was an Errol Flynn in the making. Excuse me. Like most kids his age, Alex was an Errol Flynn in the making. I apologize. I particularly apologize because I have called a lot of YouTubers read tarts, and here I am being a retard. Read tart, that is. Like most kids his age, Alex was an Errol Flynn in the making. If he had anything to say about it, if he had anything to say about it. If you haven't seen, what was it? What was it? Anyway. Okay. Captain Blood. If you haven't seen Captain Blood with Errol Flynn, you got to see it. It's great. It's truly great film. I own it. Captain Blood. Okay. All of this combined inevitably led to experimentation on works of his own with pencil and paper, and his artistic baby steps were taken during off hours after school and on rainy weekends. Failure after failure led to works that failed, but not by as much. Certain that comics was what he wanted to do for a living, Toth eventually enrolled at the Art Students League and the School of Industrial Arts. While at the latter, he won a competition and was picked to illustrate a digest softcover edition of David Copperfield, published by the school. To his astonishment, teenage Toth was in print. It's true, and he was better than most. Okay, let me read this also because I like these little inserts. Yankee King. That's Toth art right there when he was a kid. Incredible. Listen, he was 17 years old at this point. Toth becomes a heroic figure. Two of Alex Toth's earliest published works left: a text illo from Heroic Comics, number 32, September 1945, when he was 17 or 16. A splash page from Heroic number 33, November 1945, a splash page from the first byline published Toth story, also from Heroic 32. He can be seen on page 20 of this issue, thanks to Tim Barnes. Look at that. Teenager Toth. And it's interesting, I more or less skipped over Toth's early stuff because, again, he was learning, he was busy, he looked like some of the artists of the day, but still it was a little different, a little better. But when he really took off is when in his early to mid-20s, that's when he only got better. Which a lot of artists should, but don't do. He only got better, more refined, more true to what his intent was. He wanted to cut to the bone. So, fueled by his personal growth and encouragement from his teachers, Alex began to refine his craft to the point where he was almost ready for steady publication. Whether or not he was ready ceased to be an issue at the end of 1944 or early 1945. Exactly. Ready or not, he was out there. Serfdom. The Second World War was a boon to comic books and the companies that published them. Millions of Americans looking for heroes found them in the pages of the color comics, and millions of troops looking for relief from the boredom of the quiet times of war also made comics a huge industry. Presses were running at full capacity without the help of the younger men pressed into the service of their country. In fact, the lack of younger men was a problem in all aspects of the business, so much so that the comics publishers were forced to seek artwork from pre-draft age teens, Alex Toth included. Eastern Color, the originator of the comic book, might not have otherwise taken a chance on Alex, but they couldn't be choosy. "How old are you, kid?" 16, Alex replied nervously. "You're hired." Thus began his 3-year on-the-job training course in the medium in the pages of their flagship title, Heroic Comics. Even that title, it's a long bygone days, isn't it? Heroic Comics. While his friends were schlepping groceries or hawking papers, Alex was parked in front of the drawing table, making a fair rate and getting his name in print. That'll impress the babes and every guy in the neighborhood. I guess that's Toth saying it. He was only turning out about 8 pages every 2 months, and this allowed him time to perfect each and every drawing without a pressing deadline, a luxury few professionals ever got to enjoy. Unlike almost any other artist, Alex got to assess his work without pressure and to reassess it, and I suppose the pattern was set early on. The urge for perfection. That's very good, and that's very true. You can just refine, go over and over again, again, instead of the deadline crush where, as John Romita Jr. calls his style, deadline style. I'll just throw it out there. But some can do it better than others. The urge for perfection. Of all the artists I've met, and by the way, Graham Nolan, who's a fellow comic skater, who is the co-creator of Bane, drew Batman for years, drew Marvel comics, and he said something about that the other day about basically shoot for perfection. You won't get it, but you'll be so much better for it. Your art will be so much better for it. It's absolutely true. Even if you put it in your head that you're going for perfection, your art will be clearly better because you'll be pushing yourself to the point where you will only let it go your art when you know it's the best you can do. There's that ethic in there. There's that. It's important to do that. Of all the artists I've met, none have been so quick to crucify their own work and with so much disdain. This is Greg Theakston talking about Toth. For that alone, I suppose this makes Toth unique in the history of the comics. So much passion that he would resort to the total destruction of what had come before, only interested in what was to come next. Such a high personal standard is rare in the 21st century or in any other. Eastern Color had hired him as a freelancer, though he probably wasn't sure if they liked his stuff. At least he was working steady in the comics industry, which is a huge thing for a young man, for a young teenager. Huge. To be working steady and getting paid as a professional. However, sometimes there was no joy in Mudville, as in Alex's ill-fated attempt to get work from Jack Binder, the art director of Fawcett Publishing's comic book line. Best known for his Captain Marvel character, the Fawcett empire constantly nudged up against National for the number 2 spot, just after the Valhalla that was Dell. Having dealt with much of the current talent and knowing what he was talking about, Binder's critique was far from kind, but Alex knew it was honest. Heartbreaking, but honest. The best kind of critique you'll ever get, 100%. 100%. In immaculate dissatisfaction, the young Alex tore the contents of his entire portfolio into shreds and started from scratch, incorporating lessons from the recent unpleasantness. Tenderfoot Toth was far happier with the new work. Changes hot and fast. By summer of 1947, the change had been remarkable. From crude Kniff wannabe to polished Kniff wannabe and the All-American Comics line, founded by MC Gaines, but now owned wholly by National. Like what they saw, a number of their artists were working in the Kniff mold, and Toth would be a welcome addition to their kingdom. Editor Sheldon Mayer started him on a couple of Dr. Midnight, which is right here, Toth's early work. That's also Green Lantern he did. Dr. Midnight stories then had him spell Erwin Hasten and others on some Green Lantern's tales in Green Lantern, All-American Comics, and Comic Cavalcade. The total workload during 1947 zoomed to 10 pages a month, and the work was still very strong. Interesting. I mean, 10 pages a month, that's almost nothing, especially for comic artists. I wonder why that was. Maybe the fact that he was young? I don't know. I mean, some artists, again, Jack Kirby, 5 pages a day, John Buscema, 5 pages a day at times. Now, they were only penciling them, but still, it's a lot of work. Myself, I've been able to do at least another project I did years ago, 15 pages of roughs. They weren't finished pencils, clearly, but they were roughs to lay it down. And then I did, I was able to do a number of pages for Table of One, and I was able to ink sometimes 10 pages in one day. I know to some artists who spend, a week on 1 or 2 pages, that seems like I'm hacking it. No, my art is very simple. I don't busy it up for no reason. I have authentic detail, and I think also when I'm in the mold, and basically when I'm in the point of making a comic book, I can spend 15 hours a day, 18 hours. That's just the way it is. And it's just, you spend all that time in refining it, making it better and better. But again, that 10 pages a month, I think it says here. Wow. Interesting. So the total workload during 1947 zoomed to 10 pages a month, and the work was still very strong. And that's why I think maybe he was able to really get better and better and better, because he kept refining it to the point where he didn't have to publish it right away. So there's that. But yeah, right now, my current project I've been doing, these roughs, a little more detailed roughs actually. I was able to do average 5 pages a day, because I think it'll be a few hundred pages, over 300 pages. And then what I do is, as I mentioned in one of my videos, I take those small roughs and I print them out on huge sheets, and then I transfer them on my big light box. Then I can do all the detailed work and add everything from there. Anyway, so the bonus provided by working for DCAA was the cover assignments denied him at Eastern, and soon he got to do one for the multi-hero All-Star Comics number 38, and another that same month for All-Star All-American number 92, 1947. After a decade of viewing the castle from the streets, he was finally through the gates, doing what he'd always wanted to do, indenture to a magnificent master who could offer many rewards. Things had changed, and Alex Toth was thrilled. During 1948, his rate of output doubled to 20 pages a month, and he moved from the minor leagues to the majors with amazing ease. It was another demand to change the way he had done things and adapt to the new rules. The editors at National understood what working regularly in the professional world was doing to the Sprout, and encouraged him with tough love. He'd finally met the deadly deadline dragon, and, as with the best of all freelancers, slain it. On royal command, Alex's fortunes changed as Nationals did, and the prevailing trend in the middle of 1948 was away from superheroes and into any other genre. Now again, this is a young Alex Toth, teenager, or maybe at this point he was actually in his 20s. I think he was actually. So look at this. Look at that work. Look at the fine detail here. Look at the fingers, a little pinky coming out there. The hand, the gestures, just really, really good. A lot going on there. And it's all authentic detail and beautiful framing. Look at that frame with that door, watching in on this guy who he can't see, Johnny Thunder. Amazing. I think I'm gonna finish this, and then so I'll finish these 2 pages, and then I gotta go. Okay, companies diversified at an alarming rate, with more changed third-class milling permits than you could shake a dime at. The big trend was toward romance and crime comics. That's where the cash was. Lev Gleason's long-running Crime Does Not Pay was selling a hard-to-beat 2 million copies an issue. I mean, think about that. Wow. Today, comics are lucky if they sell 100,000 copies of Batman or Superman, the biggest, most famous, most popular characters. Lucky today. And here we are, 2 million a month. Man. Simon and Kirby's instant success Young Romance was doing over 1 million per, and the publishing monarchs smelled cash and opportunity. It's true, Jack Kirby was drawing romance comics for a time, which is hard to believe considering his career, but he did. Let's go invade the rich romance and crime kingdoms. Most also took a stab at Western comics, and Toth suddenly found himself stripped of his Green Lantern feature in All-American Comics and receiving commands to produce Johnny Thunder, Cowboy Western, in its replacement All-American Western in mid-1948. While it was just a case of musical titles to the suits, it was a step closer to what Alex really wanted to do and would eventually excel at: human drama. And this is true. Toth very rarely drew superheroes. Now, he loved them. He loved Batman all day. He loved drawing them. But he's mostly known for, Westerns and crime comics and drama and romance comics. That's really what he's known for. Fantasy, horror even, and eerie, and eerie and creepy, which I have the collection of, which is incredible stuff in the 70s with a lot of gray wash. He was ahead of his time in that way, because most artists were doing superheroes, and he did a few here and there, every so often, and they were great when he did. But he could have been a graphic novelist way early on with Will Eisner. A part of me wishes he had taken that route that Will Eisner did, producing graphic novels after graphic novels in his 70s, 80s, which is incredible. Imagine that, Alex Toth, just releasing those year after year. Anything he wanted to write and draw, it would have been stunning, Again, his writing was good. I mean, Bravo for Adventure is a good comic. It's just he wasn't as great a writer. He just wasn't. And he regretted it, as I mentioned in my other videos. He regretted that they didn't push him to work on that. They told him do everything. It was except writing. So he kicked himself. But he was still good. I mean, it was still a lot of charm in there. So here we go. Though not much less cardboard than the superhero work, the new projects dealt a bit more with the emotion of the scene rather than the action. People had to sit in a chair as convincingly as they formally flew through the air. The Western motifs also allowed Alex to decorate rather than simply present them. Lots of hats, horses, and architecture to master, and a lucky logical next step in his career. National was so pleased with the result that Toth worked on the Western genre regularly during the rest of his first tenure there. So these are his early drawings. And again, he already had it locked down. The blacks, the placement of the blacks, look at that. It's just beautiful. The drapery, the wrinkles on the clothing, the convincing dog, the convincing horse. So, you know what? I'm going to read. I may have skipped something here quick. Apologize. Maybe not. I thought it might be some nuggets in there that could come out. No, I guess not. I'll just continue reading this. Those are the fine details about what inked, who inked them, who wrote them. So for the next 5 years, Toth drew Johnny Thunder in all-American Western, Roving Ranger in the all-star Western, Sierra Smith in Dale Evans comics, and Jimmy Wakely comics, the latter a feature which was forced on him and which he didn't enjoy at all. The Half-Breed Romance Trail tried to cover two bases at once, Western comics sporting photo covers to make them look more like romance magazines. It's true. I never liked that ever. When you got these comic books with pictures on the cover, it's very misleading. It really is. They're pictures, then you open up and it's comic books. I know some kids probably were like, what the hell? They thought it was some kind of magazine. But I mean, personally, I just look at this art. You would rather have that than some picture of some star on the cover. National hoped to rope in a mess of cowgirls, but seems like the Phillies didn't like the brand, as the title only lasted 6 issues, even with Alex's art. I don't know enough about the impact that Toth had in those early days and what his peers were saying. I know that some of them were willing to say that he was the best, period. And he was younger than them all. And they knew he was the best, and I think his employers knew he was the best, but they didn't let that in on him too much. They didn't basically let him in on it because they probably thought that he would ask for more money, which whatever he was getting paid, he should have got more, no doubt about it. But there was that whole, I guess, missing story of his peers and how much they admired him. And you get a little taste of that in the movie Simplicity with Neil Hasten. And he said he expressed surprise that Toth liked him. He goes, Toth likes me, likes my work. He was surprised at that, which was so funny. Okay, comics radio show, both of which carried Toth art and covers. Danger Trail, which only lasted for 5 issues, was another strip which demanded that he expand beyond his then current abilities. That's always the best, right? force yourself to step up and get better and know more things that you didn't know. That was a demand from Toth, not National. Of course it was. Of course it was. He demanded it of himself, not the company who was actually paying him. While he'd done exotic locations in many of his earlier stories, now he was called on to mix the action and scenery with a more human element, character-driven tales rather than gimmick-driven stories. In various interviews, Toth has expressed his disregard for the rock'em sock'em world of superheroes and a preference for the genuine emotion of the common human. In response to William Gaines's EC, science fiction comics, weird science and weird fantasy, the always ready to milk any new trend National launched Strange Adventures, then Mystery in Space, the scene of Toth's first sci-fi work. Though his tenure in those titles would be short-lived, it marked one more change in the way the young man approaches art. Though he was a longtime science fiction fan, these stories would be some of the few in that genre that he would do in his career. For some reason, the romantic Alex was always more comfortable with a rapier or a six-shooter in his hand than a ray gun. Most unexpected is Toth's assignment on the adventures of Rex the Wonder Dog, which is right here. National Star Canine Crime Fighter. As with all of his work there, Toth rose to every challenge. Men in tights above our heads, six-gun heroes and horses below, international intrigue everywhere, or how to make a dog look like he's running convincingly. The result was a more polished, well-rounded artist who could perform with grace and skill under any condition. A near-complete mastery of his art exhibited by a quickly changing approach to the work. Fast now, fast as a quick draw or a rapier cut on the check, and at $40 per page practice rate. The effort had almost paid off, and Alex was about to graduate. Kissed at allegiance, goodbye, dear, and amen. An allegiance broken, a new one formed, an allegiance broken, a new one formed. Since he'd begun creating for All American 1947, actually by 1945 it had been subsumed into the larger National line. Alex's work was under the careful scrutiny of his editor, Shelley Mayer, at All American, and of National production manager Sol Harrison, both of whom he listened to very seriously. In an interview in Comic Book Artist, Volume 1, Number 11, Toth remembers, we had just read this, but let's read it again. When I visited dear old Shelley Mayer 1,000 years ago at 225 Lafayette Street at Gaines Publishing, he said, "Kid, learn to do it all, to the letter. The more you do of your own work, and less you rely on somebody else, the better that work is going to be." Sol Harrison, who logged in every job published by National, knew a stinker from a good one, and he'd seen every job Toth had turned in since he started at the company. Alex was well aware of Harrison's expertise in decoding the mysteries of a great comic page. Sol, like Shelley, stressed simplification, a pruning of the unnecessary, and the accentuation of what's important. Or in Toth's paraphrase, strip away everything you don't need and draw the hell out of the rest, 100%. A lesson he'd far from understood in 1947, but 5 years later he'd almost figured it out. Another lesson he was figuring out was that his style and temperament were quickly growing away from the flag of National periodicals. At a company notorious for having a rather vanilla house style, basically patterned after that of Dan and Cy Barry, experimentation was looked on with fear and misunderstanding by Imperials who didn't like the boat rocked. In a conscious or unconscious effort, Alex had conformed to the company look while in training. The problem was that by the end of 1951, he'd learned all he needed from National and was ready to move to his next natural level, unencumbered by a caste system. The place of this revelation was at Standard Comics. Standard had also been publishing comics since the World War II years with limited success. And yet, by the early 1950s, the company had become the Greenwich Village of the industry, a place to make a personal statement without much interference from the top. Hell, that sounds great. It really does, especially for an artist who has a lot to say. So I'm gonna end it there. Thanks for watching. As always, I appreciate it. Again, if you could subscribe, I would really appreciate it. I want this channel to grow. And if you could like this video, if you like it. And until next time, this was Alex Toth, Part 8. We will continue